You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. So we are creeping toward the NFL draft, and as we always will, we'll keep a close eye on the LSU guys as they get closer to the NFL draft. And Mel Kiper and Field Yates do a podcast called First Draft. You can listen to it or you can watch it on YouTube. And they were going through sleepers in this draft by position. And when they got to defensive tackle, they mentioned 3. And the third one they mentioned is a name that's familiar to LSU fans. Give a listen to Field Yates first.
Mekhi Wingo. He is a low center of gravity defensive tackle, but he is relentless. 7.5 sacks over the past 2 seasons for Mekhi Wingo. With these defensive tackles, Mel, the sack production is great, but so often what you're looking for is not just the total number of sacks, Mel, but the total number of reps in which they are totally bursting the bubble of the pocket. And I felt like Mekhi Wingo was one of the more annoying defensive tackles for opposing offensive linemen to block, because even if he's not getting a sack, he's totally compromising the way that your quarterback is able to navigate the pocket. I don't know exactly the range here for Mekhi Wingo. Maybe it's an early 3rd round pick, maybe a little bit later because of the fact that he is not, in terms of stature, on the same level as the 2 guys that we talked about before this. But Mekhi Wingo's got a future in the NFL, and it's very bright.
So he called him an annoying defensive tackle for offensive. I like that description, actually. It's a good way to describe him. A guy that's low to the ground, he's hard to move, and can blow you up from the interior. And described him as potentially an early 3rd round pick. So you'd be talking about maybe a day 2, maybe an early day, late day 2, early day 3 type guy. So it'll be interesting to see where Mekhi Wingo falls. Mel Kiper, by the way, agreed on Wingo. Here's what he said.
Mekhi Wingo is there because he's got the presence, and he had the ability to go in and wreak some havoc. And you mentioned Missouri. Look at all the players came out at Missouri program on the defensive side of the ball over the last couple of years that they put on that field. So for me, when you look at what he did at LSU, Mason Smith had shown flashes, then the injury, didn't have the production. Mekhi Wingo as well, banged up at times. Bottom line is, when he's 100% and he's out there playing, he's a guy in that backfield, quick out of the blocks field is what I saw with Mekhi Wingo.
So there's 2 things specifically with Wingo that I want to address. One is, his decision to leave, and then the other is what he might be in the NFL. I mean, the decision to leave, and listen, I think we've shared this on air. I mean, LSU offered Mekhi Wingo a $500,000 NIL opportunity to stay for 2024. I have no problem saying that on the record. And he passed. That would have been the highest dollar NIL deal LSU would have done. But he passed. Some guys just don't want to risk injury. And for Mekhi Wingo, who was a freshman All-America, and then in 21 at Missouri, comes to LSU and becomes a 3rd-team All-American at LSU in 2022 after Mason Smith was injured, went into this season, and we're really feeling like that combination of a healthy Mason Smith and Mekhi Wingo would be awesome. Well, it didn't really materialize for Mason Smith, and Mekhi Wingo had the abdominal injury that cost him really the last month of the season, and he was playing injured for much of the season. So part of me understands that if you're Mekhi Wingo, you look at it and you say, well, why would I go back, risk injury again? What if I get hurt again? What does that do to my draft stock? So some guys just aren't interested in that. And then you look at what's the effort versus the payoff. For example, some people have compared Mekhi Wingo to a guy like Kalijah Kancey. Bear with me here. I know Kalijah Kancey was the 19th pick in the draft this past year, so I'm not saying Mekhi Wingo is going to be the 19th pick in the draft. But Kalijah Kancey was a 6-foot-tall defensive tackle who was a very productive interior defensive lineman at Pitt, who became the 19th overall pick of Tampa Bay. Well, you look at Mekhi Wingo, 6 foot, 6'1", right at about 300 pounds, physically built the same way. I'm talking about how he's built, right? Physically comparable. Well, Kalijah Kancey is a mid-first-round pick, got a 4-year deal at $14.4 million. Now the team has the option for the 5th year, of course. You heard Field Yates say Mekhi Wingo could be maybe an early 3rd-round pick. Well, if he's an early 3rd-round pick, last year the first pick of round 3 was Zach Pickens, the defensive tackle out of South Carolina. Zach Pickens went to the Bears on a 4-year, $5.7 million deal. So if you're Mekhi Wingo, you could look at it and say, well, there was a defensive tackle who was the first player taken in round 3, and he got a 4-year, $5.7 million contract. There was another defensive tackle that fits Mekhi Wingo's mold physically, who was the 19th overall pick and got a 4-year, $14.4 million contract, essentially $9 million. So if you're Mekhi Wingo, you ask yourself, is it worth it to come back to school for another year, hope to have an amazing season, and maybe put another $10 million in your pocket, or you come back to school, you risk injury, and maybe you go undrafted? It's the thing you have to weigh. So I do understand the decision, that everybody's decision that they make is their own, and you factor in your own criteria. But that's the decision that Mekhi Wingo made. Now, when you talk about a 6-foot-tall defensive tackle, interior defensive player, most people start with Aaron Donald. That's just not fair. Aaron Donald is one of the most dominant interior defensive linemen ever. And he's been Defensive Player of the Year. He's an All-Pro. He's a future Hall of Famer. It's not fair to say that's the comparison, because if that's the bar, then nobody's going to meet it. But I went and looked it up today, and there's actually a pretty good number of guys who play on the interior that are 6 feet tall, like Mekhi Wingo, that have become good pros. I mean, like, if it's not Aaron Donald, the other most obvious comp is Geno Atkins, who played a long time in Cincinnati. And Geno Atkins, y'all, 6'1", 300 pounds, was an 8-time Pro Bowler, 2-time All-Pro, and a member of the 2000s All-Decades team. So I'm not telling you that Mekhi Wingo projects as Aaron Donald or Geno Atkins. I'm just saying that there are guys that are 6 feet 300 that have gone on to have great NFL careers. So that could happen for Mekhi Wingo. I just mentioned Kalijah Cansey, who's 6 feet tall, who was the 19th overall pick. But there's other comps that are maybe even better. Grady Jarrett's a 6-foot-tall interior defensive lineman who's 330. But DJ Jones, you might remember from Ole Miss. DJ Jones is a 6-feet-tall interior defensive lineman who was drafted by the Bears. Colin Saunders plays for the Saints. Is a 6-feet-tall interior defensive lineman. Now he's another guy who pushes 320, 330. Michael Pierce with Philly, another 6-feet-tall defensive lineman. I guess my point is Poona Ford with Kansas City is a 5'11" interior defensive lineman. So there are guys that are that stature, like Mekhi Wingo. When we think of interior defensive linemen in the NFL, sometimes like we think of Jalen Carter. We think of Ndamukong Suh. We think of these dominant interior players, Chris Jones. But and while that may be the prototype of the all-pro, top interior players in the NFL, there's examples of guys that are 6 feet tall that make it at that position in the NFL. And I think Mekhi Wingo, we saw the great leadership. You get in the 18 jersey. We saw the production as not only a run stopper, but a guy that can push the pocket to be an interior pass rusher. And for a guy, this is going to matter to NFL teams. Like when Mekhi Wingo goes to the combine, most guys are like opting out of bowl games. Mekhi Wingo came back from abdominal surgery to play in a bowl game. I mean, I'm not telling you that's the smartest thing in the world to do, but when you talk about commitment and drive and desire and being team first, like those are some of the intangibles that a lot of NFL teams are going to look for. And Mekhi Wingo oozes all of those things, which is why I think he is going to race up teams' draft boards. I think he's a guy that's going to go to the combine. I don't think he's going to test off the charts, obviously, because of his size, but he's going to go to the combine. If he passes the physical, when he sits down with teams, there's going to be teams that fall in love with him. And as a result, I do think he's going to rise up draft boards. And I would be surprised if he wasn't a day 2 pick. I think Mekhi Wingo will end up being a day 2 pick somewhere in there, and hopefully stays healthy and has a long NFL career. But that's a guy that both Mel Kiper and Field Yates agreed is a sleeper at the defensive tackle position in this spring draft. I just killed a fly. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.